I mean, here's the headline of just one of the stories Eric Lipton published this week. Quote, Trump cut a $1 billion mining deal his sons stand to profit. Now, the Trump Organization has since demanded that the New York Times retract that story, calling it libelous and saying that Don Jr. and Eric were not involved in and did not seek to influence the awarding of that mining contract. The Times, I should say, stands by its reporting. And I'll talk with Eric Lipton about that in just a moment. But big picture here, whether it's crypto or mining or even just the defense industry, Don Jr. and Eric are making a lot of money. Trump's eldest sons are linked to investments in at least 10 defense firms that have drawn some $3.7 billion in federal funds since Trump took office. And while spokespeople for Eric and Don Jr. say the two play no role in awarding or managing those contracts and don't interface with the federal government, clearly the Trump family has done very, very, very well for themselves in the past year and a half. We know that from the financial disclosure and all sorts of great reporting. Joining me now is Eric Lipton, investigative reporter for the New York Times. It's great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You've had a slew of stories even in just the last week, some of them just putting into perspective the totality of what we're seeing here. And you've been reporting on these financial deals for quite some time. So let me start there. Can you help us understand kind of how unprecedented, as you looked at this financial disclosure and you look at these investments and dive into them, how unprecedented is it, a president and his family making this amount of money?
Yeah, there was a question that was in my mind, and I spent time earlier this week speaking with a number of the most prominent American historians that have studied presidencies all the way back to George Washington. And every single one of them said this is completely unprecedented. There's never been anything like this. The amount of money that Trump has made in 1 year when he was in office, it just completely blows away any other appearance or real conflict of interest. I mean, the only kind of similar situations they could come up with as examples were, for example, Warren Harding. For decades, his family had owned a newspaper in Ohio, and he felt he was under pressure because it happened to be a newspaper his family owned. And so he decided to actually sell it, but he died, right around that time. And I mean, LBJ, when he became president because of Kennedy's assassination, his wife owns radio stations, and they turned over the radio stations to a lawyer. There was a lot of attention on that. But these things are, just so trivial compared to a president starting a crypto company just as he was going into office, then appointing the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission and adopting policies that supercharged his crypto business and passed, rules that actually accelerated its ability to make money. And then him making $600 million, on just one of those two crypto companies. There's just nothing. It blows every other ethical kind of minefield and scandal out of the water completely.
I talked with Norm Eisen this week about when they advised President Obama against refinancing his home at the time, which is quite quaint. There was an avalanche of reporting. A lot of it was your reporting this week. What stuck out to you the most? What do you hope people pay attention to?
I'm pretty amazed at this. We all, for the last year and a half, we've been writing stories about all these business operations, and I'm still just in shock about the size of the income to the president. It just is even way beyond what I thought was possible, how much money he made in 2025. And the second thing that's really sort of just startling to me is the amount of money that people who's followed his advice and bought his crypto have lost. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars. These are people, followers of his, who he said, listen to me. I'm your leader. Follow my lead. I'm a successful business person. It sort of reminds me of Trump University, in which he suggested that, you could become rich by studying my formula. And then people similarly bought a cryptocurrency meme coin thinking, even though in small print at the bottom of it, they said, this is not an investment. This is this is just a collectible. But everyone knew that what it was really about. It was to try to make money. And hundreds of thousands of people followed him, and almost all of them lost money, except for the insiders who got in early and sold to the suckers who came in behind him. And it's sort of startling to see the scale of the losses that these people have suffered.
Yeah, I mean, people who may have looked at him and said, he's got money, I'm going to invest here, if they thought that, and make money myself. I mentioned, and it happened, it was earlier this week, the mining story that I referenced in the opening of the show. The Trump Organization is trying to get the New York Times to retract her story about how Trump's sons stand to profit from a $1 billion mining deal Trump cut. For people who haven't read the story,
right.
help us understand what the deal was, more about the specifics there.
So in September of 2025, the president and the Commerce Secretary were both involved in negotiations to grant this tiny company access to tungsten mine in Kazakhstan. It was potentially a mine which they thought they had $80 billion worth of tungsten. It's an enormously important metal that's used for military purposes and all kinds of other manufacturing that the United States needs. China controls the supply. Really good policy to try to increase U.S. access to tungsten. The Biden administration was working on it. Smart idea. And the Trump administration has continued to work on it. But the Trump administration has decided to put, more than $100 billion worth of financing to try to accelerate access to these things. But what we found out in our investigation was that there are 14 companies that are linked to the Lutnick or Trump families that have a financial connection to the Commerce Secretary's sons or to the Trump sons that are in line to get as much as $8.9 billion worth of that federal funding. And one of the companies is this mining company seeking access to the tungsten in Kazakhstan. And we have very clear documents, unambiguous, that show that the Trump sons, in between September, when they were negotiating it, and November, when they finalized the deals, the Trump sons, with their partners, went in and took an investment in that company. And our reporting is bulletproof. And the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal wrote editorials comparing them to Hunter Biden. I know that really upset Eric Trump in particular. And they're trying to take the story down by writing letters that suggest the story is inaccurate. It's 100% accurate.
You sound pretty solidly confident that it's unimpeachable.
It is.
Let me ask you about crypto. I mean, I did my best to lay out, and there's been so much reporting, so obviously we kind of skimmed the surface of some of it. You're reporting about how Trump got rich, as you just said, while investors lost money. When it comes to crypto earnings, what do we know about the $800 million he made from World Liberty Financial? Help people understand that, because that also feels like a very sketchy, is the best way to describe it, part of the financial entanglement here.
It's sort of impossible to imagine that a president of the United States is earning money by creating what's called, through his sons, a stable coin, which is a type of a cryptocurrency that it's supposed to be like a mutual fund where it keeps a dollar-to-dollar value. But that he promoted and signed legislation that created a regulatory standard around stable coins for the first time in 2025. So he promotes and signs the quote, the Genius Act that for the first time creates a regulatory system around it. But then his sons now run one of the largest stablecoin operations in the world. But most of the money in that stablecoin operation actually comes from the government of the United Arab Emirates. $2 billion of the approximately $4 billion that's in the World Liberty stablecoin came from the United Arab Emirates. And that money came at the same time as they were seeking access to some of the most important technological, advances that humans have ever made. NVIDIA, AI chips, and the Trump people were negotiating access by UAE to those chips while $2 billion of the UAE money was going into the Trump's family business, and he was getting richer from that. And so how is that possible? That is not merely an appearance of a conflict of interest. That is a conflict of interest. And as a reporter, I'm going to call it as I see it. That is a conflict of interest. It's unambiguous. And again, nothing like that has ever happened in American history, where a president has been so deeply involved in a business that creates these kinds of conflicts.
And their family and his family is massively benefiting, and his sons. This week you wrote about this too, Financial Disclosure, which also showed us more about the millions of dollars that Melania Trump made last year. It kind of pales, I guess, in comparison to all the things we've been talking about here, but it is kind of interesting. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Melania, her income also went up massively, although it's like small dollars compared to her husband. But her income mostly went up because of Jeff Bezos and Amazon.
And the movie.
And the movie that they made about her, the documentary that ran on Amazon Prime, I guess on the Amazon stations. So most of the biggest increase in her income came from that movie, which, the amount that she was paid for that was very unusual. And the amount that was put in to produce that documentary was also very unusual. But, Jeff Bezos and Amazon made that choice to put that money into her at the same time as he needs, Blue Origin needs rocket contracts from the Department of Defense. There's an antitrust investigation of Amazon. I mean, there's huge things on the table for Jeff Bezos as he tries to become more friendly with the president. And he essentially writes an $8 million check to Melania. So, I mean, again, it's a conflict of interest.
It didn't exactly break records for selling tickets at the box office, but they probably could have predicted that one. Eric Lipton, thank you for all of your reporting. I'm sure people watching read your reporting. They should if they want to get smart on corruption and what is happening in this administration. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.